while games with wild gameplay and busted graphics get millions of copies sold and hundreds of thousands of peak online players. Other generic multiplayer shooters with good visual quality get a 700 player peak online and end up closing the studio. And then you might say, then who's buying your graphics hype? No one cares. Gameplay is what matters, bro. That's a strong point, my dog, but hold up. There are about 5 reasons you're missing. Let me break it down for you. Why studios drop cash on details like horses, balls, physics. Why spending a lot of money on visual is not killing games. How small things like fire effects are way more important than you think. And why realism actually matters. When you first peep a game, the visuals hit you right in the face, right? That first look can really decide if you're into it or not. If it's all bright colors and anime chicks, you can catch yourself in the mirror thinking, I'm too grown for this. Your hype might deflate real quick, and while it's gonna stay shut tighter than a drum, sure, the gameplay or story could reel you back in, cause, let's be real, games are for playing, not just watching. But still, if the visuals ain't vibing with you, some folks might bounce on the spot, cause they ain't trying to roll around as some goofy character, no matter how much jiggly he is. A lot of projects have different visual styles, and the choice is driven by a whole deck of reasons. First, if your development budget consists of a half-drunk beer and a pack of squid rings, then trying to drop a game with realistic graphics is like trying to squeeze juice out of a rock, because you'll have to pay for 3D assets. Free ones might not fit or looks busted, as your mood when you realize you're in too deep. Second, if you're legit with cash to splash and trying to drop your game on potato devices like phones or portable consoles, you better pump the brakes on that realism dream. Those gadgets ain't got the muscle to keep up. Detailed objects and 4K textures eating up gigs like it's no big deal. And if you want to keep your game running smooth with a decent FPS instead of a PowerPoint slideshow, because not every device can handle high quality visuals with those requirements. Then come the headaches with the story, setting, and target audience. If the game features a lot of unrealistic mechanics, like magic, mutants, or talking to women, it's easier to go for a stylized look. But if you've got the budget and want to convey a story through visuals that everyone can relate to, then realism is the way to go. We all mess around here and know how things are. The environment feels familiar, and most importantly, comfortable. That's why projects that visually resemble reality, or don't stray too far from it, has less chances to be ignored. And the more mass market the product aims to be, the more standardized it will become, and realistic visuals fit that best. These kinds of projects have always been around and always will be. They wanted to flex their graphics skills practically from the start. For Mortal Kombat, the guys dressed up like it was a high school musical and posed for photos so that each character would look lifelike. The weapons in Doom 93 were assembled from photographs. Yes, they were toy guns, but just look at what people are running around with in CS these days. Come on, buddy. Even Mario 64 used real photos for the environment textures. That mustachioed pimp has more in common with realism than Genshin has with gaming. If we keep moving forward in time, things get even wilder. At some point, they started painting shadows from environments and objects, and immediately decided to show off by using them in gameplay as a stealth mechanic. A couple of years later, they were already making characters cast shadows on objects, and so it went. Doom 3, thanks to those shadows, became pure horror. As a kid, I nearly crapped my pants twice, and I didn't even launch the game. Half-Life 2, with its detailed physics and scattered debris, could still teach the physics at school for some games today. Just look at the facial animations. Sure, it looks stylized and not fully realistic, but the devs gave them life, making them more interesting than in other projects. Take Doom, which came out the same year as Half-Life. Look at the faces of those monsters. And even though GTA 5 might look cartoonish, that doesn't mean it was meant to be that way at that time. If you look at Battlefield 3, which was considered cinematic, Michael even under witness protection, but didn't stray too far from that. So to really grasp how and in what aspects an old project looks realistic, you suddenly need to compare it to other games released around the same time, not just judge how it looks now, because all of this evolved gradually. Saying they didn't care about graphics back then is just not true, and that might raise the question, so what? Who even cares about graphics? People play games, not just stare at them. That's a strong claim. Okay, I won't argue that technically any image on the screen is computer graphics, even this kind, and that with this logic you could replace all elements in games with simple shapes, which would make rolling balls around easier in some ways, but harder in others, or suggest playing 100 hours of a game with such visuals. Let's skip straight to the point that it would be better to work on gameplay rather than graphics. Fine. Let's assume all the details were stripped down to just the essential items that let you understand what the location is. Or should those be removed too, or left in? Either way, good luck chilling in the cursed world you've created, where graphics are stuck at that level and don't evolve, while the gameplay remains the same. Why the same? Because the guy modeling the objects isn't suddenly writing the story. The one placing the light fixtures isn't the one writing the quests. Moreover, it's not even necessary that the person designing the mechanics is the one who coding them later. The bigger the studio, the more specialized workers they have. So, if a game has impressive graphics, it doesn't mean the gameplay or story suffered because of it. Different teams of designers and developers who may never even meet handle these aspects. Blaming a AAA game for focusing on visuals instead of gameplay is just dumb. You could counter by saying the cash spent on visuals could have been used to better story and gameplay. First off, okay, but what about sound design? Do you have any idea how many people are involved in creating all the sounds, ambient noise, and music in a game? Would downgrading or almost eliminating them really make the mechanics better? Secondly, no, the budget allocated to graphics won't boost the gameplay. It might buy more beer and shrimp, sure, 100%. But gameplay? Nah. Developing graphics and gameplay are fundamentally different tasks. Visuals are constantly being refined by a team trying to navigate technical limitations, while gameplay doesn't require that kind of power to implement, and is tied to the idea and vision of a few game designers, sometimes even just one. Do you really think the gameplay of Zelda is something that couldn't have been done technically 10 years ago, considering the hardware it runs on, or replicated now? Come on, don't kid yourself. All of that could have been done by a small squad. It Takes Two, packed with tons of mechanics, was developed by 11 people, while 3 times as many worked on its visuals. The programming department for Ragnarok consisted of 60 people, while 260 handled the graphics. To make your hard with the visuals, you need hundreds of hands. To make you come with gameplay, you need just one, but cares one. Spending 6 years and hundreds of millions recreating New York in detail, that's a piece of cake. Spending the same time and money on gameplay. Are you kidding me? This isn't the indie scene, where everything's developed solo with six-pack or by a bunch of guys tripping on mushrooms. These woodmen are on a clock, and if they don't want to be polishing the game at their own funerals, they gotta be smart about where they spend their time. And obviously, in that case, they'll choose to sharpen the gameplay, because competing with top-tier studios like Naughty Dog on graphics isn't worth it, unless the project is specifically focused on visuals, but more on that later. And this actually works out for those gaming connoisseurs because they're getting pure gameplay practically for free. Considering the abundance of such games on the market, you can pick up something solid to suit any taste and play like a king. Tired of browsing the low-tier games? You can pop into the boutiques of the AA segment, wander around there, or if sitting at the computer has given you hemorrhoids, grab a Switch and enjoy gameplay-focused projects for true aesthetes. But don't expect polished visuals here. Some of these games are rough around the edges, man. They'll throw real stone textures into a cartoon setting, and it ends up looking like a hot mess, especially when you stack it next to something like Genshin, or using unnecessarily high-detailed textures. Hit the comment if you want to see the comparison of them. If making mechanics was so hard, Steam wouldn't be stacked with all these wild off-the-wall games that don't even come close to anything else out there. Sure, some of them are jank as hell, but you might find the diamond in the rough. Plus, as technology advances and becomes more accessible, even these underdogs can get quality assets easier than getting a date. They're already capable of outdoing AAA behemoths, not just in gameplay, but in their obsessive attention to detail in certain visuals. The only spot where the big dogs keep their crown is the sheer scale. They can roll out a consistent visual feast over 20+ hours of gameplay, flexing so hard that your internet connection's begging for mercy just to download that luxury. In AAA, projects' graphics are getting hard faster than gameplay is getting deeper, and when they start combining the two, it can hurt Vestal players. They will blame the most noticeable thing: the detailed visuals. But in reality, one doesn't mess with the other. It's more accurate to say, at least the graphics are rock, because otherwise, nothing would be rock at all. When a game fails in its main thing, that's a lame, no doubt. But not everyone is playing every new release 24/7, and even if the gameplay's shallow as a kiddie pool, someone's still splashing around it, and what play a big role with that is the graphics. A good image right from the start can signal that the developers have created something truly impressive. If you come home from work exhausted and want to chill, but with something epic, stunning, and spectacular, but your dealer is out of hood for a few years, an interactive experience like a game can fill that gap for you. When crazy things are popping off on screen, it's good to see a decent stuff, be amazed by the scale, and savor the details. Not just get a half-hearted experience and move on. While it doesn't affect gameplay, good visuals can still evoke emotions and please the eye, even if it's not for everyone. When you see a location packed with details, it adds credibility and provides a deeper understanding, unlike something more basic. Plus, this is storytelling. By looking at how a character lives, you can get what kind of person they are and draw conclusions just from how their place is set up. Objects can add context to the story. As I said before, realism is the most familiar and understandable style for everyone. Investing in it means attracting more and more players who gives a cash. In graphics, progress is steady but gradual. It has an iterative approach, meaning it improves step by step. Ever heard about PBR? If not, I'll explain it in my next video about the main secret of realism. Trust me, you'll want to stay tuned to the channel for that. Trying to hit realism these days without this PBR, forget about it. It's just not happening. Want to know when it first dropped? Over a decade ago. And the real kicker? The core formula behind it was first introduced way back in 1964 by some dude working on US electronic defense, and it stayed classified for a while. None of this happens overnight. It takes years. Ambient occlusion, which I'll also cover in the next video, came around in 2007, and whether it's PBR, ambient occlusion, or ray tracing, they all have one goal: to make sure the player is so immersed that they want to not just feel the game, but to feeling themselves while feeling the game. These kinds of projects make waves and grab attention from folks who aren't even into gaming, pulling in extra cash. Capturing the vibe of a past era or peeking into a detailed future? Why not? Without any excuse like, oh, the texture isn't great, but you're not playing it for that, right? Just look at how much buzz is generated by videos that absolutely nail realism, and how fast a project gets roasted if certain aspects look below average. And how many views do ultra-realistic mods? And someone wants to say graphics like that don't matter? Now, imagine what would happen if technical aspects were completely neglected. For the entire industry, it would mean that all projects would stagnate at the same level, and there would be no one left to push the boundaries. You might argue, okay dog, detailed environments and spectacle are important, I get it. But where's the line? Why spend resources to make different states for a horse's balls, random animations you'll see once in the entire game on a single character, and so on? None of this adds to gameplay or narrative. Who cares about any of this? Firstly, to create a balance. The technical capabilities allow scatter a ton of objects, sure, but mindlessly stuffing the environment is a strategy that smells like shit. This is where the big dogs flex their muscles. Cash money. With enough bankroll, you can really shake things up and breathe life into the scene, rather than just a backdrop filled with high detail assets serving purely functional gameplay purposes. The idea is to immerse the player, making them feel the vibe and believe in the world around them. Take an example from Mafia 2. Vito steps out to cruising through the neighborhood on his way home. First thing that grabs your eye is a newspaper stand. Got that local gossip going on. A few steps away, some guy's trying to drag his buddy out for a cold one from his wife. Across the street, a gang of hooligans is hassling a worker, and further down, you can overhear a conversation between a barker and some passerby. Meanwhile, someone's popping out of an apartment with a bucket, and up above, planes are zooming by. And Vito hasn't even made it home yet. There's still a couple more scenes like this before he even hits the doorstep. Now imagine how much vibe would be lost if the task was just to get to your mother's house, and they dropped you right by the door, where you'd only have to walk a few steps to hit the checkpoint. Gameplay-wise, nothing changes. The story stays the same. The end result is the same. You reach home, whether it's done the easy way or the immersive way. But in that first scenario, you're soaking in everything around you, really feeling the world, That extra walk, it's not just about the journey, it's about deepening that immersion, making you believe in the world you're stepping into, instead of just walk a few steps. Secondly, this is a game, not a movie. If here everything takes place within a narrow corridor, often the player can veer off the beaten path, explore a different area, or simply take a detour. And when they do, you better make sure it's worth their while. This instantly adds a few points to the atmosphere, 3 points to the believability of the world, and 10 points to Gryffindor. Otherwise, what's the point of exploring if all that's waiting around the corner is a whole lot of nothing, or maybe a stash of loot you might don't even need? It's like giving them a tease with no payoff. That's not how you keep players hooked. If nobody bothers to load these spaces with cool details, just imagine the buzz when someone finally steps up and nails it. The world building and intricate details would be on another level, and you can bet folks will be lining up to see what this cyborg of a game has to offer. And that's where the third point comes in. Marketing. Journalists and YouTubers will pump out a ton of videos, basically giving the game free advertising, and they'll keep it rolling for years after the release, keeping the hype alive. Some might even create entire channels just to explore every nook and cranny of the game, and then they'll start comparing it to every similar projects. Heaven forbid the new game skimps on these details. It'll get roasted, even if the story or gameplay is better. It's yet another reason to keep the game in the conversation. You might say, dude, this is already happening. And I'd say, well, that's the point. But then there might be a clarification of the position, like, okay, but what about all that RTX, path tracing, and the small things like fire movement, etc.? The average player doesn't care about that. Why spend so much resources on it? Well, bro, you nailed it. But there's one thing. Progress. It is what turned this into that, and that into this. Quality doesn't just pop up out of nowhere, and it doesn't rely on one thing. It's a gradual process, where every single detail gets pushed to its max. Skip out on those little things, and you're not making progress because it all fits together like a puzzle. The reason I call out these minor flaws and mistakes is that they're what contribute to the overall level of realism. It's those tiny things that tell you whether you're dealing with the real picture or just a poor CG. That's fine if you're not an expert in how fire should look or move, that's what the specialists are for. But if I first show you a good version and then what Ubisoft puts out, you'll spot the difference. Maybe not instantly, but you'll get it. All these little individual details all together, they're exactly what levels the quality all the way up, and it's a hella valid upgrade. Tech's getting beefier, so if it can handle this stuff in real time, why wouldn't we slap it in the game? Think nobody gives a damn about this kind of detail? Just the fact rich people are buying top shelf GPUs tells you they want to peep whatever the AAA wizards got poppin', or sales of remakes and remasters where the biggest change is the graphics, could argue with that statement. And don't get me started on how like a whole quarter of console players pick the quality mode over rolling with 60 FPS. Those dudes are straight up wild. Even I don't mess with that shit. Visuals are leveling up just like every other flex. Monitors, for instance. Hating on stuff just cause it's moving forward? Bruh, get over it. Might as well go cry over black and white movies with no sound. Or go try clubbing a mammoth or something, I don't know. But where does realistic imagery even come from? Look, fooling your grandma is easy. But fooling you, a gamer who's sitting in the chair more than Stephen Hawking, that's a whole other level. Gotta call to the serious guys to make sure they can even trip up a savvy hustler like you. Like I said before, it's all about going from the tiny stuff to the big picture. Somebody might pull off insane realism, but if they mess up on, say, the fire effects, that's just giving us ammo to call them out. And even money can't always fix this kind of problem. Ever wonder why some games with insane budgets and supposedly top-tier detail still look less realistic than some bootleg demo whipped up for a bag of Ruffles with salt and vinegar? What if I told you? There's this one trick that almost every hyper-realistic demo's got, and they even managed to slide it into Cyberpunk with an 800 kilobyte mod. I'll break down what every graphic aspect actually does, why even 3D scanned objects can look fake, where realism really comes from, and, believe it or not, what clouds have to do with it. But all that's coming in the next vid. Trust me, you're gonna be blown away by what I dug up. Hit that subscribe button so you don't get lost. Alright, take care bro. Catch you later.